What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the PFF NFL show. We got a fun one here for you today as we are going over the top 100-ish free agents that are upcoming for the free agent class. When we say ish, we're not shortchanging it. It's not going to be like, well, they're only going to give us like 92 or 95. No, we'll go over 100. That's why I said 100-ish. At least 100 guys in this free agent class. We'll go position by position, give you about 8 to 10 names for every single position that you should know, and then we'll point out a couple of guys that we really want to highlight, whether we think that they are the top of the market, they could be a bargain in the market, whatever it is. Trevor, Sikkema, and Dalton Wasserman here with you guys. Dalton, how we doing, my friend?
We're good. We could do without it being 10 degrees outside on the walk into work, that's for sure. Hopefully it warms up pretty soon, but otherwise all good.
Is it snowing in Cincinnati right now? Because it is snowing in Charlotte right now, and I feel like almost like throwing on some Christmas music. I know we're long past about that, but that's what it feels like here today.
No, it's not. It snowed like 2 days ago, and since then it's just kind of frozen over and been like 10, 12 degrees every day. So we got past the snow part, and we're just freezing up here.
Now you're just freezing your butt off. Well, I'm glad that you made it into the studio because we got a jam-packed show for the good people today. Let's start with the most important position that everybody wants to talk about for plenty of different reasons. Let's start with quarterback. Okay, when we look at the 2025 free agent quarterback class, there's a handful of notable names in here. The one at the top that everybody's going to point to is, of course, Sam Darnold from the Minnesota Vikings. He was playing so well that there was even talk that maybe he doesn't even hit free agency, but now it feels like he will, especially after the last two games, not exactly being the best two games that he had this year. Russell Wilson and Justin Fields from the Pittsburgh Steelers, Aaron Rodgers from the Jets, Jameis Winston, Daniel Jones, Mac Jones, and then Joe Flacco to kind of round things out as the more intriguing quarterback options that we have this free agency period. Dalton, I'll give you sort of dealer's choice of how you want to start this conversation here, but I do have a question for you after that. So where do you want to go first? Which one of those names really stands out to you?
So for as much as we have some traditionally big names and even a couple of Hall of Famers in there potentially one day, right? I think the headliner has to be Sam Darnold after the year he had in Minnesota. He's going to be 28 years old next season. And you're talking about a guy, his season finished in his last two games with a dud, but he's still the 11th best passing grade in the NFL. Fourth in big-time throws with 34, but there's the drawback of he's still kind of risky with the football. 27 turnover-worthy plays, the most in the NFL. You and I talked about during the season how he went kind of hot and cold in the red zone. That was kind of a big factor in his performance in certain games. So he's certainly talented. He's certainly earned some sort of contract, right? He's one of the 32 best quarterbacks in the NFL. And you have a situation very much like the Buccaneers had with Baker Mayfield after his first year of success down there, where, he's a gunslinger, but also it's pretty clear that he's a starter, right? He's developed himself into that level of quarterback, at least a midline starter. So I think the Darnold situation is really interesting, and the number of teams that could be in on him may depend on what they think of this draft class as well. I think it's all tied together. When you talk about teams like Tennessee or the Giants or the Raiders, these are the same teams we've been talking about at the top of the draft class potentially taking a quarterback. If one of them pays Sam Darnold something like 3 years and $100 million, that takes that option off the board. So Darnold's situation is really the most interesting considering he's the youngest guy other than Fields of this bunch, and last year he was the most productive.
Yeah, and when you look at sort of those QB-needy teams at the very top, the Tennessee Titans, the Cleveland Browns, the New York Giants, the Las Vegas Raiders, the New York Jets, right? I think that those are all the ones that sort of come to mind that would be interested, or the most interested in this quarterback free agency class, because those are the ones that are also the most interested in the quarterback class coming up in the draft. But when you look at those teams, I don't think any of them want to be really desperate when it comes to the NFL draft. And so I'm just so intrigued to see how in on this free agent quarterback class a lot of those teams are, to maybe not go into the draft and be as desperate as what it seems like right now. I think the three quarterbacks that I would say teams are going to be most interested in, Sam Darnold's one of them, but then the other two you would have to trade for. Matthew Stafford, we've heard over the last couple of days and the last week that he could potentially be available via trade. And then Geno Smith's kind of the other one that we've sort of been talking about for the last year. So I think those are the top three that you look at. But my question for you is, outside of those trade options and Sam Darnold at the very top, which one of these guys, Russell Wilson, Justin Fields, Jameis Winston, Aaron Rodgers, Daniel Jones, I'll throw Mac Jones in there as well. Joe Flacco's, really up there in age, so I wouldn't even consider him. But which one of those guys is next for you? Which one of those guys would you go, yeah, okay, if I got to have somebody to start for me next year, and win ball games for you, which one are you taking? Independent. I'm talking like independent of price. Price doesn't matter, whatever. Who would you actually choose out of that bunch? Who's next?
Honestly, it's probably Russell Wilson if you're talking just 2025, right? He did have a really solid season in Pittsburgh, and eventually their lack of weapons and lack of pass protection even just broke down their offense at the end of the year, and it became just them throwing go balls. That was really their only good offensive production. So I think Wilson can still function in an offense with some weapons, get to a place where maybe he can throw underneath a little bit more, or even if he stays in Pittsburgh, add some weapons that can help him underneath as opposed to just throwing go balls at George Pickens. So Wilson, to me, is probably the guy of that group. He had a good season. He was in the top 15 in passing grade. He had the number 1 deep passing grade in the league. So he's still got the deep ball. He can still threaten defenses vertically. I think for 1 year, maybe even 2, it would be Russell Wilson for me.
I'm tempted to say Justin Fields. I really am. And I understand that so far throughout his NFL career, we've sort of seen a passing ceiling with Justin Fields. But if you take his years in Chicago, and if you say those years were too unstable for him to really grow the way that you would want him to, whether that be from the coaching staff, the offensive line in front of him, the lack of playmakers, there were a lot of reasons why I think Justin Fields probably failed in Chicago. Not that he's totally blameless in it all, but then you see him in Pittsburgh, and last year was the best that he looked. So if you can convince yourself, hey, he was never really going to grow in Chicago, and then you put him in a situation that's a little bit better and he actually did show some growth, I can convince myself that I go, yeah, okay, well, maybe the best version of Justin Fields, we haven't even seen yet. So I think I am tempted to say the guy that I would have next on that list is Justin Fields. And then I think actually Aaron Rodgers would be after that. Again, maybe I'm going like too pie in the sky with it, but I wonder if he got humbled a little bit over these last 2 years. Leaves Green Bay, kind of calls his shot. He's a legend there. He knows he's a future Hall of Famer. He's one of the best to ever play the game. He goes over to New York. It's a big city. He's going to be the savior of that franchise that hasn't had success in a long time. He has the injury, and then it was just a disastrous year this past year. I wonder if he's humbled a little bit. If he's going to keep playing the game, I wonder if he goes, you know what, let's go to a situation where I'm buying in, it's cohesiveness between myself and the ownership and the general manager and the coach. It's maybe less of, him calling his own shots and things like that. So I actually think my ranking of these guys would probably be Justin Fields, Aaron Rodgers. And then I can see your Russell Wilson argument. I don't disagree with it. I think that Russell is still a winning quarterback in this league. Is he a playoff winning quarterback? Probably not, but it's basically like him, or how much can you stomach of Jameis Winston's craziness and that roller coaster that comes with him every time that he steps onto the field. So that's probably how I would rank them. But what do you think about Fields and Rodgers?
No, Fields, I think, we did see him function better in the passing game early in the season, and there were still some arguments that he should have played the whole year. I get it. He went 4-2. He was getting rid of the football quicker. I think you just have to be able to maintain that sort of development and still build the offense around his legs, right? I think being in an offense with a really good run game would help him, where he can be another option in the backfield. And then Rodgers, look, I can tell you personally, if you're associated with, or if you're a fan of the Jets, that's going to humble you. So that might be the case. I just think with Rodgers, the passing numbers were still pretty good last year, depending on which ones you're looking at. The lack of mobility is an issue, right? He would have to go to a team with a really good offensive line, and I know he still gets rid of the football quickly, and the arm talent, there's still something in there, but I think he would really have to go to the right situation, and then a team would kind of have to deal with still the circus that goes on with around having Aaron Rodgers on your football team, right? So, look, you mentioned it. He tried to go in and basically run the Jets. It didn't work out. I think anywhere he goes, there's going to be a bigger spotlight, right? I've kind of looked at Indianapolis as a place where he could go and succeed, but then it causes a whole controversy with Anthony Richardson, and is that worth any production you could get on the field? So I think Rodgers still has something in the tank, but there is a lack of mobility, and there's a lot that comes with it.
Yeah, I think that Cleveland is sort of in their own world, or in their own bucket, when it comes to what they're having to deal with, having Deshaun Watson, their salary cap situation, perhaps having to trade Myles Garrett. So that situation is a little bit, on its own and isolated. But I'm going to put you on the spot here. I'm putting myself on the spot as well. I think the Titans, the Giants, and the Raiders, the three teams that also have major quarterback needs that we often has as quarterback destinations for the NFL draft, I think that all three of those teams need to at least bring some sort of new quarterback in before we get to the end of April. So they're going to have some sort of change. There's got to be some new face. Is there somebody who just like right off the bat of this group, you'd say, okay, I like this guy for the Titans. I like this guy for the Giants. I'd like this guy for the Raiders. I mean, I like Justin Fields going to the Las Vegas Raiders. I think that's a really nice pairing for them. If he can go over to the Raiders and they can say, okay, we at least have Justin Fields going into next year, then they don't feel like they have to get super aggressive to trade up into the top 3 to leapfrog the New York Giants or do something that they don't want to do for this quarterback class. So like, I look at Justin Fields going to the Raiders as making a lot of sense. I think Aaron Rodgers makes sense in Tennessee. Does Rodgers want to go to Tennessee with the last year of his career? Maybe not, but like I like Rodgers' landing spot in Tennessee. And then for the Giants, maybe Russell Wilson. I guess Russell Wilson probably if they were gonna sign one of these free agent guys. And that's outside of like the splash guys like Matthew Stafford. Obviously, we talked about if you have a chance to go get one of those guys, you probably do it. But that's probably how I would say it. I would say Rodgers to the Titans, Russell Wilson to the New York Giants, and Justin Fields to the Las Vegas Raiders. How do you feel about it?
I'm kind of stuck between Tennessee and Vegas for Darnold because I think Pete Carroll, the question is going to be, does he want Russell Wilson for the old connection and just to know what he is and have a veteran in there? So I'll go with Darnold to Tennessee. I think it's just in case they want to take a different player outside of a quarterback with that first overall pick. It would free them up to take, say, Abdul Carter or Travis Hunter with that first pick. Right. I'll say Darnold to Tennessee, Wilson to the Raiders to keep that to keep the Pete Carroll connection going. And then I guess by default, Fields to the Giants, because even if you draft a quarterback, you could kind of bridge him in and at least, again, give Fields a chance. I don't know that a team is really going to give Fields a shot to start 17 games this year. He may have to continue to prove it 5, 6, 7 games at a time or for as long as he can be productive. And Brian Daboll might not be a bad place for him or a bad coach for him to be with, considering some of the work he at least did with Daniel Jones's legs, right, and working him into the run game. So I'll go with Fields to the Giants, Wilson to the Raiders, and Darnold to Tennessee.
The only thing that I have the pushback for here with those is I feel like Russell Wilson and Pete Carroll were butting heads towards the end of their Seattle times, but perhaps both of them now meeting in different organizations, they go, hey, is it water under the bridge? We letting bygones be bygones? Maybe that would be the case, and I think that they could certainly raise the floor because they have worked together and they know how to have success together. Let's move on to the running back position. A couple of running backs here in the free agent class that are intriguing. Aaron Jones from the Vikings. He signed just a 1-year deal when he went over there last year. Javonte Williams, Najee Harris, Rico Dowdle, J.K. Dobbins, Jalen Warren, Nick Chubb, Kareem Hunt. That's the list of guys that we have there from the running back position. Who do you want to start with here to talk about some of these available running backs?
So, honestly, I think just for the Cowboys situation, I'm curious on what their decision is on Rico Dowdle, because he did have a pretty nice end of the year. He had 100-plus rushing yards in 4 of his last 6 games, 74.4 rushing grade for the season. This is at least an average starting back in the league now who kind of had a late-season breakout as they were running the ball more and all their injuries had happened. Dak Prescott and even CeeDee Lamb was banged up later in the year. So I wonder if they're going to re-sign Dowdle, if that plays a part in their early decision-making come the draft, right? Because there's been so many projections about somebody like Ashton Jeanty at 12th overall to him, who's clearly the best back in the draft. And if you take him, he's going to play all 3 downs. He's going to play 90% of the snaps at running back for you, right? So I do wonder if there is a path where the Cowboys re-sign Dowdle, take another position, an O-lineman or a D-lineman, I think, in the first round, and then maybe dip in and find a complimentary back to Dowdle and use a committee backfield, right? I think, again, it's been so assumed that, hey, the Cowboys are going to take Ashton Jeanty at 12 if he's there. Well, if he's not there, or if they just decide that they have other more pressing needs, which you could very well argue they do, then you have to go with a committee approach anyway. And if you had let Dowdle walk in free agency, then you're starting completely fresh. Probably, I would say there's a chance you would end up drafting 2 backs in the mid-rounds if you didn't have Dowdle, and you got to completely rework this room. So it is something I think the Cowboys need to address, the running back position. And we're going to know, I think, first and foremost, if whether or not they sign Dowdle is going to take us down the road of what their running back room is going to look like.
Yeah, I think that's a worthwhile conversation of certainly what the Cowboys are doing with the guy who, albeit not the strongest running back room, led their room last year. It's not as important to go into the draft like, oh, we need to fix the running back weakness because you can kind of address it anywhere. So it's not as important to say getting a new quarterback in there so you don't feel like you have to draft one at the very top of the draft. But it is sort of worth noting. The two guys that I'm the most intrigued about are Javonte Williams and J.K. Dobbins. Obviously, two guys that unfortunately are very talented football players whose NFL careers have been more disappointing than we thought that their talent believed that it was going to be just because of injury. J.K. Dobbins has dealt with injury throughout his NFL career. Javonte Williams had a great rookie season, over 900 rushing yards, and then he had the knee injury in his sophomore year, second year in the NFL, and it was a pretty major knee injury. It was a LCL, PCL, ACL injury, and worked his way back from that. We've seen him over the last 2 years, but he has not been that guy. And unfortunately, Denver's one of those teams that really needs a running back to stand out. And so every opportunity was there for him, and he wasn't able to take it. And so I wonder if a new change of scenery will be there for him. A very talented back, one that I liked a lot. I loved his mentality. I loved how much power he played with behind his pads. He had good explosiveness too. I felt like he was somebody who is worthy of the second-round selection that he was taken with, but I wonder what his market is going to be like. I wonder how many teams go, you know what, that UNC version of Javonte Williams is still there. So he's the guy that I would shout out there in that group. Anybody else before we move on to wide receivers?
No, I'm just curious. The only other one is maybe the market for Najee Harris, because there's kind of the debate with him as far as traditional stats and having 1,000 yards in each of his first 4 years versus the rushing grades and all the rate stats being a little bit lower. He's kind of a high volume guy in Pittsburgh. Clearly, somebody's going to sign him because he's got the size, and when he gets in the open field, he can run. But I would be curious to see his market as well, because he's going to end up somewhere. I don't know if it'll be staying in Pittsburgh. I don't know if it'll be staying in Pittsburgh with Jaylen Warren, who's also a restricted free agent. So the Steelers certainly have a lot of situations to deal with in their backfield. And again, I wonder where this deep running back class in this draft leads to the decision-making for some of these teams that are losing these guys.
Man, I'm thinking about Aaron Jones, too, wondering how much he's got left in the tank.
He had over 1,600 yards, total yards this year, Trevor. 30 years old.
I know. And that's why, I don't know what Chicago's cap is, but maybe just keep the NFC North tour going, right? Played in Green Bay, then Minnesota, and then you can move over to Chicago, because I think that, Ben Johnson could do some wonders with a guy like Aaron Jones there. So I think about that as a potential landing spot. But, Aaron Jones is very intriguing to me as well. Let's move on to wide receiver. Wide receiver, handful of notable names, powerful names, guys that are a little bit older, though, and have a little bit of context to them. The report is out there. James Rapien put this out that T. Higgins is going to get franchise tagged. He has not yet, but that is sort of the report of what we heard earlier this week. So that, to me, is the direction that it feels like we're going. But until that happens, he's scheduled to be a free agent. So he's going to be at the very top of the market. He is our number one ranked free agent that we have of all positions over at PFF.com. You guys can go see all of those free agent rankings. Higgins, Chris Godwin, coming off the knee injury, but still, just one of the best and most steady, consistent wide receivers in the game today. Stephon Diggs, who's also coming off an ACL tear. Amari Cooper, who was traded to the Bills, but they knew that it might be a one-year rental thing for him. I'm curious if he ends up going back to Buffalo or not. Keenan Allen with the Bears, DeAndre Hopkins with the Chiefs, Marquise Brown with the Chiefs as well, Darius Slayton, Deontay Johnson, Mike Williams. Dalton, who do you want to point out here from this group?
Yeah, I'm curious after the injury that he suffered, I believe it was in Week 8 this year, what Stephon Diggs has left in the tank. Because even in the short time with the Texans, a 79.7 receiving grade, which is solid, 1.84 yards per route run, and the second highest rate of routes run from the slot in his career. And I think that's what you're talking about now, is a movable or even a slot weapon in an offense, and a guy who can still pick up first downs, right? He's not as explosive as he used to be. His missed tackles force rate after the catch was the lowest of his career this past year, but I think there's still something there as long as he's healthy, right? And I think his numbers, all those numbers I just showed you, are they at his career averages? They're maybe a little bit below, but there's still a productive player in there, if you're Stephon Diggs. I'm curious if Houston has the money or wants to keep him, if they feel good about where his knee is progressing, right? But I think he's at least something between a wide receiver 2 or a really good third option in a good offense, in an offense, for a contender, especially if they want a guy who in the slot can just pick up first downs in big spots. Stephon Diggs can still win one-on-one in tight spaces. He's just not as explosive as he used to be, but the question is going to be the injury. If you can guarantee he's going to come back 100% healthy, I think he's absolutely still going to have a good market in free agency, especially for a contending team that needs a receiver.
Yeah, I'm not ready to write off Stephon Diggs quite yet. And I even think that him going back to the Houston Texans does make a lot of sense for that team, especially because you have Nico Collins. You don't have to worry about Diggs getting fully back to health and being like a wide receiver one like he has been, with Minnesota and when he was with Buffalo. Like, you don't have to worry about that. You can allow him to be that wide receiver two for you. Shoot, you can even still draft a wide receiver in this draft if you want to maybe push that wide receiver two spot. So I actually do think that spot makes sense. I think it's more likely than not that Chris Godwin goes back to the Buccaneers because they love him. As somebody who I covered the Buccaneers before I worked at PFF, and so I've got some connections there. I talked to some people there. They love him, man. And he loves Tampa. Him and his family love the Tampa Bay area. It's been home for him. I know that they've talked a lot about that. And, of course, money talks. I have to believe that Tampa will be pretty competitive with their offer to Chris Godwin, even with him coming off of the knee injury. The only way, if all things are equal, like let's just say he's deciding between, the Buccaneers, the New England Patriots. I don't know who's another team that would really want a guy like Chris Godwin.
Maybe a Washington, the Commanders.
Washington, okay, one of those teams. If it's the same deal, whatever that number is between all three teams, I think he goes back to Tampa. But if there's a team that's willing to give him like $3-4 million over whatever market asking is for him, then you start thinking about moving on because that's a lot of zeros, that's a lot of commas, that's a lot of millions, especially coming off of an injury, and you just never know how your body's totally going to respond to that. So if all things are equal, I do think he's coming back to Tampa, but if somebody really believes in the future of Chris Godwin, I could see him going elsewhere. I think a spot like Washington does make sense. It's a really good call out. As for the rest of them, I think Amari was a good addition to the Bills. I wonder what he would sign for because I would like to see him back in Buffalo. That would be nice. Keenan Allen going back to Chicago, I think that would be an ideal situation for him with Ben Johnson now this time around. Now, you kind of just got to get to the bottom of how much you think he has left in the tank. And I think that's then the question for a couple of these other veterans. But yeah, I think that's probably how I would look about this free agency class. The one that's probably the most intriguing to me is Darius Slayton, because I do feel as though Slayton has gotten a lot better. I think he's a good vertical threat, and I think he's even rounded out his game pretty well over the last couple of years. There just really hasn't been the consistency at quarterback in New York to showcase that all the time. So Darius Slayton's actually kind of the one that, even over some of those other veterans, like over a DeAndre Hopkins or a Keenan Allen or a Marquise Brown, I'd probably take a flyer on Darius Slayton above those other guys. What do you think?
Yeah, I think he's a funny one because he's never been in an ideal situation with a good quarterback, right? So I think you wonder, could he try to go somewhere with a more veteran quarterback, or at least a better one than the Giants have, and go, okay, this guy actually is going to have some success here? You mentioned as a vertical threat. I almost wonder, because a couple of these guys the Chiefs are losing, could a team like Kansas City look at Slayton and go, okay, he kind of fits in here. We have Rashee Rice, we have Xavier Worthy, but to add another vertical outside threat like Slayton, like they were looking for from Hollywood Brown, maybe Slayton would actually give them that over a full season. Obviously Brown had the injuries this year, but no, I think he is an intriguing option, and he would really benefit from going to just any better quarterback situation than he's had really his entire career with the Giants.
Yep, I agree. Maybe a team like the Chargers as well. Just looking at a couple of different teams like Arizona. Arizona's intriguing because you got Marvin Harrison Jr., you got Michael Wilson, but you could also now have a guy who takes the top off the defense if you get a guy like Darius Slayton. So he's probably the most intriguing wide receiver. Not the top name, but the guy who I'm watching the most. Tight end class: Juwan Johnson from the Saints, Mike Gesicki, Tyler Conklin, Zach Ertz, Austin Hooper, Tommy Tremble, Mo Alley Cox, Kylan Granson. Not the strongest tight end group, but I feel like we don't really get strong tight end classes. Is there anybody there that really intrigues you out of that bunch, Dalton?
I find Gesicki interesting, if only because he was their third leading receiver for the Bengals last year. And every time Joe Burrow talks about what he wants for this roster and he talks about the core of it, he mentions Jamar Chase, he mentions T. Higgins, he mentions Trey Hendrickson. And then at the end, he throws Mike Gesicki's name in there too. And it seems like he really liked throwing to Gesicki this year. There's a debate, about how much of a true tight end he is, with as much as he's flexed out and he's really kind of a big receiver who can do a lot of things on the outside and in the slot. But Burrow mentions Gesicki a lot when it comes to the core of the Bengals offense especially. And it seems like right now he's kind of winning the battle, right, when it comes to, trying to keep this core together, and T. Higgins getting franchise tagged, and they're still negotiating. Now if they can get Gesicki back on a reasonable price, maybe they need to add one more slot weapon in the draft, maybe in the middle rounds, and then obviously build a defense. But I just find his situation so fascinating because right now it feels like Joe Burrow is trying to take control of what's going on with the Bengals in this roster construction, and Gesicki gets mentioned almost every time that he brings it up. I think him maybe coming back to Cincinnati is a fascinating situation to look at. And then what his actual market is going to be. You're talking about in the regular season a guy at tight end who had the 8th most catches and the 10th most yards. He was 18th in receiving grade. So he is a solid player for the role that he plays, and whether or not he's back in Cincinnati, I think is actually a pretty big story.
I look at Zach Ertz, and the guy's 34, but he played in and started 17 games last season for Washington, and it doesn't seem like he's going to retire. It feels like he's going to keep it going, and so those teams that we like to project either Colson Loveland or Tyler Warren to. I'm not saying that Zach Ertz is a better option than Colson Loveland or Tyler Warren, certainly moving forward in the future, but the Colts, right, like we talk, you want to go into the draft having ultimate flexibility, and you do that by handling or raising the floor of some of your biggest roster weaknesses. So a team like the Colts, a team like the Denver Broncos, the Los Angeles Chargers, I think they should all be interested in Zach Ertz for how well the veteran played last year and how healthy he was, how long he was able to play throughout that season. So he's the one that I'm watching as the veteran who he's still got some juice left in him, and I think that those three teams are big-time targets for them. I also look at Juwan Johnson. Maybe is he going from the Saints to the Broncos, the Sean Payton connection there, with being able to bring him in and not feel, again, as desperate to draft a tight end in the first round if they feel like a guy that they like a little bit better or have higher on their board has fallen to them. So those are the two options that I like there. At the tight end spot. I think the Mike Gesicki call out is obviously a good one as well, because I wonder if Burrow's going to win. You got to feel like he is, because if you're paying Burrow, you owe it to then the investment that you're making in that franchise caliber quarterback to surround him with what he needs to compete at the very highest level. And if he's somebody who's pounded the table for, hey, over the last couple of years, we have watched good defensive players leave. Joe Burrow has watched the other side of the ball get decimated with those big-time contributors for them leaving and going elsewhere. And I think that he is really putting his foot down and saying, no, we, for one, shouldn't be doing this anymore because we're in a winning window. Two, don't let that happen on my side of the ball. So I wonder if he is going to go back to Cincinnati there because of that. All right, we're going to move on to the offensive line in a second, but before we get there, question for everybody out there. What does your child's success look like for you? Maybe it's them traveling the world, starting a business that they love. Maybe it's just that happy, comfortable lifestyle. Whatever that is, Fabric by Gerber Life can give you the power to help them make that happen and pursue their dreams, both big and small. Fabric by Gerber Life, it was designed by parents for parents to make it easy to plan for and manage your family's financial path. With the kids' investment account from Fabric, you can start investing in your child's future today. Whole thing is online, very easy to manage. You can do it right from your phone. Starts with $20 and there's no contribution limits. Tax advantages, the funds are SIPC insured up to $500,000 plus no commission fees, just a low flat monthly maintenance fee. Kids can't invest when they're minors, but this kids investment account allows you to invest on their behalf and gives their investments so much more time to grow, to be used on all sorts of stuff. When they're kids, music classes, sporting events, tutors, camps, whatever that is, or when they're a little bit older, helping them out with that business, that first house, that first car, whatever it is. Join the thousands of parents who trust Fabric to help protect their family. Start investing in your child's future today at meetfabric.com/PFFNFL. That's meetfabric.com/PFFNFL, MEET fabric.com/PFFNFL. Portfolios are managed by Fort Washington Investment Advisors Incorporated. Additional services provided by Apex Clearing Corporation. All investing is subject to risk. Learn more at meetfabric.com. All right, moving on to offensive tackles here for the free agent class. Got about 8 of these guys that I want to highlight here, starting with the prize jewel of the offensive tackle class, and that is Ronnie Stanley. Who is going to get Ronnie Stanley? Is he going to go back to the Baltimore Ravens, or is he going to get a lengthy contract somewhere else? Cam Robinson's next, Tyron Smith, Alaric Jackson, Dan Moore Jr., Morgan Moses, Jedrick Wills, Kelvin Beachum. Who are we talking about here in this group, Dalton?
So for me, I think Ronnie Stanley, like you mentioned, I think for a contending team, obviously he could stay with the Ravens. We've talked about Kansas City as a potential fit right there. I think for a contending team to give him probably a 2-year contract obviously would be a great move. But the guy that I'm most fascinated with is actually Alaric Jackson from the Rams, because he's the one guy among this group that I feel like I would be comfortable giving him a 4 or 5 year contract, knowing he's only going to be 27 years old next season. And he really had a breakout, especially in the second half of this year. If you look at what he did down the stretch, week 9 through the divisional round, the 7th best left tackle in football, the 4th best run blocking grade, 12th best pass blocking grade. Trevor, he was the only left tackle in that stretch, week 9 through the divisional round, to have at least 400 pass blocking snaps and only 1 or fewer sacks allowed. Okay, I think you're getting a young kid who had a breakout this year, and if there's a team that needs an offensive tackle and they want a younger one, let's say I'm thinking about somebody like the Washington Commanders or even the New England Patriots, right? Maybe if you don't force yourself into taking an offensive lineman at 4th overall, right, by signing Alaric Jackson, then you can attack at receiver. You could take Travis Hunter. You could take something like that in the skill positions, and they probably need to make multiple offensive line signings anyway, but I feel like this is the one guy among this group who could actually be a long-term cornerstone for somebody because he's so young and he's had such a recent breakout and he's really developed during his time with the Rams. So Jackson actually fascinates me more than anybody. I think he's going to be a really good addition to somebody's offensive line, and his development in LA is the reason why.
Yeah, I think that the New England Patriots are a great call out for him. This is a team that's got a lot of money to spend in free agency, and that's the chances that you want to take, right? If there's a guy who's hitting free agency and he can help out the offensive line, that's what you want, because we do a lot of mock drafts, obviously, here on this channel and at PFF, and a lot of times when we get to the Patriots at 4, it's so hard for me to not give them Will Campbell or whoever you think the top offensive tackle is, Armand Membu, Kelvin Banks Jr., whatever. It's so hard to not draft an offensive lineman at 4 because the need is so dire. This was the worst offensive line in the NFL last year. And until free agency comes around and they get some new names along that offensive line, you almost feel like you can. Even if Abdul Carter or Travis Hunter were available in the mock draft simulation, you almost feel like you can't. And that's what free agency is. You've got to be able to upgrade that position, the trenches specifically, to where you're not hamstrung into drafting a guy that maybe is a little bit lower on your board versus somebody who is still on the board. So love the Alaric Jackson call out there. Very curious about Morgan Moses. I just don't think that it was great in New York no matter what, but he is a veteran who's played a long time in this league. He's had a lot of success in this league. I wonder if a team like the New Orleans Saints, for example. Okay, you could sign Morgan Moses to a 1-year deal. You can kick Trevor Penning inside and see how he plays at guard for a full season if you don't believe he's a long-term offensive tackle option for you, because his rookie contract is coming to the end here. You've got Talise Fuanga now playing left, so I think that could allow them to have some flexibility there. I'll look at the Tennessee Titans, right? That's another team where they're picking at the very top of the draft, but could they trade down? It gives them flexibility if they moved J.C. Latham over to the left side, and he's playing next to Peter Skoronski. They've got Lloyd Cushenberry as well at the center spot, so that left side of the offensive line's all right. But bring in Morgan Moses to be a little bit of a floor upgrade over Nicholas Petit-Frere at that right tackle spot. That could give them flexibility to do what they want in the draft. So that's the spot that I could also see a guy like Morgan Moses going. I feel like he's still got some steadiness to his game, but you mentioned the offensive tackle class is kind of going to go as Ronnie Stanley goes, but those are a couple of guys that we also are intrigued about in the group. On the interior offensive line, got about 10 guys that we're naming here. Drew Dahlman is one of them for the Atlanta Falcons. Ryan Kelly from the Colts. Coleman Shelton from the Bears. Trey Smith is the crown jewel, if you will, in this group. From the Chiefs, Will Fries, who's very intriguing. Dominant season before he got hurt this past year. And then you got guys like Tevin Jenkins, Kevin Zeitler, James Daniels, who very small sample size last year, but was playing really great in Pittsburgh before he got hurt. Mekhi Becton coming off that Super Bowl win now as a guard and not a tackle. Brandon Scherf from the Jags. Talk to me about this group. Who do you want to point out here?
Look, I think a guy that needs to get more hype and is going to get more hype once the market starts moving is Drew Dahlman, the center from the Falcons. And if you're talking about running one of these Shanahan outside zone sort of schemes, you couldn't ask for much more out of a center than you get out of Dahlman. He was the 5th best center in football this past season, 6th in run blocking grade. And you look at that system, again, mostly under Arthur Smith and even this year under Zach Robinson, you look at the outside zone run blocking, 94.3 grade in that area, right? Over the last 2 2 years, only 3 offensive linemen at any position have been better than that, and that's Frank Ragnow, Trent Williams, and his teammate Chris Lindstrom. When you're talking about names like that, that's the level you're getting on with the run blocking. He's also at least a solid pass protector. I think you're talking about San Francisco, talking about the Chicago Bears. I think there's multiple teams that are going to be in on Drew Dalman, and he's going to make more money than you think. He's a top-notch center, and especially in a system like that, I think he's going to help a team a lot. I actually think as much as Trey Smith has been talked about in Chicago, I think they should be just as in on Drew Dalman at that center spot to really lock up that run game, and then they can figure out what comes behind it at running back later. But we know they have to fix the interior. That might be the first guy that I call if I'm Chicago.
Yeah, I mean, that Atlanta offensive line has whooped ass the last 2 years. And, Dalman is a reason why we saw so much success from them. I'm so intrigued about Will Fries. I really am. Like, I wonder if he is somebody who the Washington Commanders would take a chance on, right? With Sam Cosmi's injury, and you go bring him in and you have a little bit more flexibility along the offensive line. I thought he played fantastic in Indianapolis this year before he got hurt. And so he's the guy who I'm really intrigued on because, of course, like Trey Smith is going to sign for a lot of money. Do you have a favorite Trey Smith landing spot? I mean, the New England Patriots obviously make a lot of sense for him. We talked about how bad that offensive line is. Maybe Tennessee as well, if you wanted to put him at that right guard spot. I'm trying to think of it. I guess Chicago, right? If they're losing all 3 of their starting interior offensive linemen, it probably makes a lot of sense for you to go make a splash and try to get somebody who's going to be a major difference maker because you like those tackles there. Those are a couple that come to my mind. Any specific landing spots with Trey Smith that you like outside of Kansas City, of course?
I think Chicago is certainly one. I'll tell you, I'll throw another one too because I believe both their starting guards are free agents. I think the Arizona Cardinals would make a lot of sense too, with as much as they want to run the football, and we know Trey Smith is solid all the way around. I think the Cardinals would be another one that would look at him at the right guard spot, and then maybe they figure out a right tackle situation in the draft while still fixing their defense. So I think the Cardinals are one I would throw in along with you. But I think any of these interior groups, first of all, tell me if I'm wrong, I think this is the deepest group of any of these that we're talking about in free agency. So you have a lot of options, and I do think the Chicago Bears are the most interesting to see which ones they buy in on and how expensive they get.
I think there's just a lot of hope. Right? I mean, it's not a guarantee that all these guys are going to work out, but certainly Trey Smith and how he has played over the last couple of years. Kevin Zeitler has been great on that Detroit offensive line. So, like, he's a little bit older, but maybe you're signing a guy who you feel like is going to be a solid starter for you. You mentioned how great Drew Dalman is, Ryan Kelly as well, and everything that he's been able to do with the Colts. And then you got guys like, again, Will Fries, James Daniels, Tevin Jenkins, in particular, these guys that you could go, we think we can get a lot out of this player. And we might be able to get him at a little bit of a bargain, either because of injury or just the timing of when they're hitting free agency. Mekhi Becton, I'm very curious at how much he gets when he gets to the open market. So there's a lot of names on this list on the interior that you could see being starting caliber guys elsewhere, which makes it very valuable for a team like the Minnesota Vikings, who need help along the interior offensive line, the Houston Texans, who need help on their interior offensive line. Are they going to make a big splash for one of these guys? I wonder if Fries could also be a really good addition, or James Daniels could be a really good addition for the Minnesota Vikings. I wonder if that's a pairing. And some teams that could go after those guys. Let's go to the defensive side of the football. Let's talk about the edge rush group first. We got Khalil Mack, Josh Sweat, Hassan Reddick, Malcolm Kuntz, Baron Browning, Dayo Odeyingbo, Chase Young, DeMarcus Lawrence. We got a handful of notable names here. A lot of guys at the edge rush position. Where do you want to start here? There's a lot of names here that we could start with. You want to talk at the top, or you want to talk some value players here in the edge rush group?
I'll go with the value side of it. And Baron Browning is a player every year who it feels like he shows you just enough to make you believe he can still be a starting caliber player in this league. And these are his numbers right here after he got traded from Denver to Arizona. You see it there, 16th in pass rush grade, 6th in pass rush win rate. I mean, at the very least, there's a good situational pass rusher here. Didn't have a good run defense grade this past year, but had it right around 80 the year before in 2023. So I do think he's a guy. It's been a bit inconsistent. He got traded last year, wasn't great in Denver. I think he was dealing with an injury early in the season too, but he was productive in Arizona Sikkema. So I could see the Cardinals keeping him, or I think other teams that need pass rush help, right? I think about Atlanta and Carolina in the NFC South going, okay, maybe this isn't a top-of-market option. We didn't get Josh Sweat at the top of the market, somebody like that. But Browning at maybe $6 or $7 million a year, maybe even a one-year deal, could give you a productive pass rusher for teams that really need multiple answers, and he could be one of the secondary options for them.
Along the same lines, I'm a Baron Browning guy. I feel like he's better than his production has indicated throughout his NFL career. So I feel like I'm always going to continue to believe in him. So I like that call out there, giving him some praise. How about your boy Malcolm Kuntz? This is somebody who I felt like you talked about a lot in the preseason. You're like, man, he had a really good 2023. He was this breakout player. 2024, he's going into a contract year. He could be a beast for them along that defensive line that added Christian Wilkins to it. And you're hoping that Tyree Wilson gets better. And obviously Max Crosby is there. And like Kuntz was going to be a major part of that group. And then he's got the knee injury early part of September. It's season-ending one. He wasn't able to play. And so, like, that's a bummer. But this is somebody who had a really nice 2023 season. And so, again, it could be a really good timing for some team to just say, hey, this is a great stand-up pass rusher that we're going to be able to get here. Like, I think about the Falcons, right? The Falcons are a team where they need some more juice at pass rush, but they're not a team that has a ton of cap space, if I remember correctly, where the Falcons at.
No, it's not.
Yeah, they're way lower on the group. They're like 27th, 28th in total cap space right now. They're actually in the red, so they're over the cap at the moment. They need to get cap compliant, but you move some money around. You can be a little bit flexible with certain contracts that you have on your roster. You might be able to go out and say, hey, because Kuntz is coming off an injury, we'll get him at a bargain bin price, and he could be great for us as an edge rusher. He could be one of the top edge rushers that we have there, especially if you're not bringing back Matthew Judon. So that's, for an example, a spot that I could see with Malcolm Kuntz. But I agree with you. Those two guys I'm very intrigued with of where they are going to land. Khalil Mack, sort of the interesting one at the very top. It kind of sounds like that he wants to come back to the Chargers. He feels like he knows the Chargers are going in the right direction. If he's not going to the Chargers, though, you would think that he's going to some contender. So, is this Washington? Is that a spot for him? Does he go to the Commanders there? Maybe Baltimore, if they have the money to afford him. I think that spot could make sense. Certainly Detroit, we talk about them with an edge rusher all the time. I guess you could throw in Josh Sweat there for those destinations as well. But that's what I think about when I think about Khalil Mack. I still feel as though, especially if the Chargers are going to move on from Joey Bosa, if they're going to get that cap relief, which is like $20-25 million in cap relief, if they cut him, they'll have enough money to bring back Khalil Mack and want him there. But what do you think about him? Do you think he's staying in LA, or do you think he's going somewhere?
I think it's very, very likely that he stays in LA. I think it is going to be a story with the Chargers in free agency. We'll get into the interior guys in a second, but how much of this defensive line can they keep together? Because you mentioned it, likely to cut Bosa, and then the other three guys in the starting four are free agents. So you got an entire starting defensive line that you have to figure out how many of these pieces you're bringing back or not. And the other thing I wanted to mention, because I was thinking about it, we were talking about Malcolm Kuntz. I think a good spot for him would be to kind of a buy low thing, and you were talking about teams with not much salary cap space, but the Dallas Cowboys. Maybe just the same way he was maybe the same way he was a compliment to Max Crosby. He could do the same for Micah Parsons. With Matt Eberflus as their defensive coordinator, they're going to switch to a similar four-man front. I think maybe on the other side of Micah Parsons in Dallas, take some pressure off him and keep adding to that pass rush. I think that might help them too.
Defensive tackles. Osa Odighizuwa from the Cowboys. Speaking of the Cowboys, he's an upcoming free agent. Milton Williams, Levi Onwuzurike, B.J. Hill, Calais Campbell, Jerron Reed, Poona Ford, Tair Tart, Tershawn Wharton, DJ Jones, a guy that we didn't have on that list, but I'll shout out Bobby Brown III from the Los Angeles Rams, who I think was really nice as a run defender this year. Handful of guys, very notable players along the defensive line. It feels like you mentioned interior defensive line is one of the deepest group. I think that you said interior offensive line was one of the more deep groups that we have in free agency. I think interior defensive line is as well. Where are we starting here? Who do you want to shout out?
It's funny because when we were going through our team needs earlier this week for all 32, and the number of them that I was writing down, okay, they need some sort of run stopper up front. And there was probably 6 or 8 of them that I said, well, just go sign Poona Ford, because you know what? He had such a great year with the Chargers last year, his best grade since his rookie year. fifth overall this year among defensive tackles, third among defensive tackles in run defense grade, and a negative grade on just 9.8% of his run defense snaps. That's an elite mark. The only player who was lower was Dexter Lawrence. So Ford is not a guy who the traditional stats and the sacks are going to tell you, oh, that's an elite player, but the impact he has inside in the run game, you could see that was a big reason that the Chargers got so much better in run defense this year was Ford and even Tahir Tart, who also is a free agent there. So they're going to have to figure out which or both, or how many of those guys up front again that they can retain, like we mentioned before. But Poona Ford's a guy I think just for the run defense factor. I think about San Francisco as a team that could think about him. Dallas is a team that could think about him if they could afford him because he's a little bit older. I think he's 31 years old. I think even the New York Jets, who need somebody next to Quinnen Williams who could stop the run. There's a lot of places that Poona Ford could go. The Cincinnati Bengals are losing B.J. Hill, but they could bring Ford in. There's a lot of options for him. I think the market's going to be better for him than you think.
Calais Campbell is the guy who I look at in this group. Dude, he's going to be 39 years old next year, and I would still sign him. I would still sign him and think that he's going to be a contributing member of the defensive line. With him being up there in age and almost 40 playing on the defensive line, but still playing pretty well, he's probably going to limit himself to just contenders, right? So I look at Buffalo. I look at maybe Washington, although they need more of edge. They've got the interior kind of worked out. But if you want to bring him in for the veteran presence, I think that you could do that. Potentially Philadelphia, if he wants to be part of that rotation there with the Philadelphia Eagles. I think that could make sense for them. Maybe the Green Bay Packers, maybe the Los Angeles Chargers. But Calais Campbell is somebody who I think is a very intriguing player because of how smart he is, how experienced he is, and how much he could really be that little bit of, extra push for a roster that's already almost there and a veteran presence on that defensive line to help a team maybe get over the top for a Super Bowl. So I love the Poona Ford shout out. I think that you're right. I think the teams that are really looking to upgrade their run defense, he is one of them. Again, I think Bobby Brown is another one. Deshaun Wharton from the Chiefs is another one there, but I'm most intrigued about where Calais Campbell is going to land and which team that he decides to sign with, because I really do think he could be an impactful signing there. All right, before we get to linebackers, corners, safeties, those are the last three positions we're talking about here in the free agent class. This podcast is brought to you by our friends over at Cherry Bundy, the performance drink that is fueling the Health Elite revolution. No matter what you're doing to be active, whether you're training for a marathon, whether you're doing CrossFit 5 days a week, or something as simple as, hey, getting your steps in, taking a light jog around the neighborhood a couple of times a week, Cherry Bundy's got some great products for you to feel and perform your best. Natural products, natural ingredients, no added sugars to it. Tart cherries that it's made with, highest antioxidant fruit or vegetable in the world. It helps reduce soreness, increases recovery, gives you help for immunity support, also gives you that natural melatonin to help you sleep a little bit better, recover a little bit better. It's used by the very best. Nearly 500 collegiate and professional sports teams use this product. Every single NFL team, all the teams that are traveling overseas, whether it's games in Europe, games in Brazil, games in Mexico, whatever it is, they've got Cherry Bundy with them to really help them out. Got all different sorts of products as well. Some are for giving you energy before workout. Some are based on, allowing you to recover a little bit better. Some are specifically designed for sleep, and you can check all that out on Amazon. You can see it. Sometimes retailers nationwide will have it, so Publix, Kroger, check those out. Check your local places there. If you can't find them, though, and if you want to get 20% off whatever you are ordering, go to cherrybundy.com. PFF20 is the promo code that you can use there to get 20% off all of your Cherry Bundy orders. So go check out the website, go check out all their products, see how they can help you be the best athlete that you could possibly be. Linebacker, we got some big names in this linebacker class. Dre Greenlaw, Nick Bolton, Bobby Wagner, headlined by Zach Bond, and obviously the defensive player of the year caliber year that he has had. Got Orion Burks, Terrell Dodson, Robert Spillane, Levante David, Jamian Sherwood, Ernest Jones. There's some heavy hitters in this group, Dalton. What do we think about it?
Yeah, you're not kidding. Look, 3 of the top 4 graded linebackers from this season, Bond, Wagner, and Burks, if you set the snap minimum low enough, are free agents, which is crazy to me when you think about just, it feels like it's been a position kind of in flux lately, both in the league and in the draft. It's hard to find elite guys, and we have new guys emerging every year. But the one I'm intrigued with among this group is actually Jamian Sherwood from the Jets. He just turned 25 years old. He was really the one guy on this entire Jet defense who played above his level of expectation. C.J. Mosley dealing with injuries, so he got to play really a starting role this year. And he was a top 20 linebacker, as you see there, 17th in coverage grade, 5th in total stops among linebackers. I think this is somebody who's got a very interesting market, especially as young as he is, right? He's the youngest player among this group, and he's among the most productive. And I think about a couple of things. Connections, first and foremost. Let's say the 49ers lose Dre Greenlaw. Who's their new defensive coordinator? Robert Saleh, right? The Falcons could probably use another linebacker. Who's their new defensive coordinator? Jeff Ulbrich, right? And then I think about some other teams where he would just, I think, be a big improvement over what they had last year. You know what I really like that might work is the Denver Broncos, right? The linebacker spot on Denver was really the one big weakness. They had a top 10 secondary, they had a top 10 defensive line. Linebackers lagged behind, and both their starters are free agents. I think Denver could be a team in on Sherwood's market looking for a younger player to build long-term, right around Bo Nix's window that's going to be, there's a little more of a long-term vision there. I don't know if Denver's looking to win a Super Bowl this year, but a young player like this is somebody they could sign. Him and Nick Bolton are the two guys here with the youth that they have on their side. I'm looking at as going, okay, which of these teams, especially with younger quarterbacks, could be looking at a piece like that to build their defense over multiple years?
Yeah, I wonder if a team like the Dallas Cowboys, who you remember last offseason, Jerry Jones said, we're all in. And then they didn't do anything in free agency, and then they kind of dragged their feet with the two big contracts, with Dak Prescott and with CeeDee Lamb. And so I don't think they're going to want to repeat history in that regard. They're right around the cap floor right now with their effective cap space. So I wonder if they figure out a way to move some money around to be a little bit more active this time around. Linebacker is one of those areas where they need to get a lot better at. Eric Kendrick's a free agent for them. DeMarvion Overshown, unfortunately, had the injury at the end of the season. So, are they a team that looks at Dre Greenlaw and says, hey, could be a linebacker one on basically every other team when he was fully healthy. He just happened to be playing with Fred Warner, one of the best in the NFL. We can get him for a little bit more of a bargain because he's still coming off of the injury. But if you believe that he's going to get back to form, I wonder if a spot like Dallas is there for Dre Greenlaw to potentially be that linebacker one for them. I think it's a great shout out with the Denver Broncos, maybe to take a jump into that linebacker market with some of those top guys. Maybe it's a Jamie Sherwood. Maybe it's even more. Maybe you're talking about like the Nick Boltons, the guys who are at the very top of the market there as well. I think about Washington, right? If Washington's moving on from Bobby Wagner, if they feel like, okay, the age is really catching up to them, do they go after a Zach Bond? Do they go after a Nick Bolton? I think that could be an area with as much cap space as they have to spend. I also look at a team like the Rams. The Rams are a team that I think has a linebacker need. I think they like what they have out of the undrafted free agent that they found in Omar Spates. But this is a team that's been in the offensive trenches, really emphasizing sort of being a more powerful team between the tackles. I wonder if they spend a little bit more money at the linebacker position as an extension of believing the game is going to be a lot more about staying between the tackles and playing with a little bit more power than we have seen over the last 4 to 5 years. So, and Nick Bolton could make sense there as well as a landing spot. But I like the Sherwood shout out as well. We're obviously not going to mention Levante David at all whatsoever because he's not playing anywhere else other than the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Don't you dare take Levante David away from me. But in all seriousness, I don't think Levante is going to play anywhere. If he would have left Tampa, I feel like it would have been the previous contract because he actually still had like a couple more years left. Now it's sort of this 1-year contract for however much longer he wants to play, and I think that he'll retire a Tampa Bay Buccaneer. Robert Spillane's also pretty interesting as well. I think the Raiders are probably going to want to do what they need to do to keep him, but he was a menace this year. He was all over the field, and so he's a sneaky one where I think a lot of people just assume that he's going to be back in Vegas because you don't want to think about this Vegas defense without him there in the middle, but I could see a team being very interested in him for as much of a tackling machine as he was last year.
Yeah, no, I think Spillane, if he does leave the Raiders, I think there's several of those teams that you mentioned, especially with as good as he is in the run game. You talk about a Denver. I think it's another one maybe in the Dallas Cowboys price range, and they really need to prioritize their run defense. I think Spillane and the attitude he brings up front, he would be a huge addition to Dallas. So if he doesn't stay with the Raiders, I think he's going to be a prime target for several teams.
Good call out there. The cornerback position. Got DJ Reed from the New York Jets, I think, highlighting this group here. And then we got a handful of other interesting players. Rasul Douglas, Carlton Davis, Charvarius Ward, Asante Samuel Jr., Byron Murphy Jr. We got Mike Hilton, Kendall Fuller, Paulson Adebo. These are the guys that we have listed as sort of those top targets there. What do you want to call out from this cornerback group?
I think you have a lot of solid veteran players here, especially a lot of guys who can play well in zone coverage and fit in several different systems. I think about, San Francisco. I think about the Rams. There's a lot of different team fits here. But I look at Byron Murphy from the Vikings, and still a relatively young player. Had the best season of his career this past year under Brian Flores. 72.8 overall, 72.6 coverage grade, 6 interceptions, all of those career highs. So I'm curious if he's a player that Minnesota is really trying hard to retain, or how expensive that is going to be, because you can never have enough cornerbacks, right? And I think he's one, if you're feeling comfortable about signing to a 3-4 year deal, I think him and DJ Reed might be the two guys that you think about, okay, we're going to get him for multiple years. He's going to be productive, pretty scheme versatile, right? I think we've seen multiple solid seasons out of him, and Murphy coming off of his best one really intrigues me to see how his market's going to look.
I'm very interested in Charvarius Ward, who I think in a vacuum, the Commanders, I was about to say there's a lady spot for her. Whoops, spoiled it. In a vacuum, I think Ward would stay with the San Francisco 49ers, but been through a lot on the personal side. Him and his family have been through a lot during their time when they've been in San Francisco, and he's kind of talked about like, hey, I kind of just want to change the scenery, and you understand and respect that. But I think he's a good football player. I really do. So I look at teams that are going to run a little bit more cover 3 on the outside, and I think Charvarius Ward would be good. I look at the Buffalo Bills. I know they don't have a lot of money to spend, but again, like that contender, somebody's got that experience that Ward has over the last couple of years with those playoff runs that San Francisco has been a part of. Do they go after a guy like Ward if they can get him a little bit cheaper to say, hey, now we don't think we have to take a cornerback at the back end of the first round. We could really focus on defensive line, something like that. Commanders are another spot with them losing a couple of cornerbacks from their room last year. Do they get him to play on the outside of one of those cornerback positions so they can move Mike Sanders still a little bit more into the slot? New England Patriots, right? Do they set themselves up to say like, hey, let's go get another corner opposite Christian Gonzalez, and we can sort of play it like that, and again, have more flexibility to play the draft however we want. But Ward is the one who I'm really looking at, and I think that he could be a big-time sort of like over-the-top difference maker as a guy who probably shouldn't be leaving the 49ers if we're talking about just talent alone, but you can understand just the situation of him wanting to sort of have a fresh start somewhere else. So what about DJ Reed? Obviously, like over the last couple of years, last 2 years, he was part of the best cornerback duo in the league with Sauce Gardner. It wasn't a great year this past year for the Jets defense overall, but he feels like if you're going to make the biggest splash at corner, he's kind of the guy to do it. Is there a specific team that you really think for DJ Reed?
No, I think there's going to be at least a half dozen in on him, right? I think about the Raiders, who had the lowest coverage grade in the league last year, and they need multiple pieces in their secondary. I think about the Arizona Cardinals, who could definitely use an outside cornerback or two. They're really good in the slot. They're really good at safety, but they need some outside help. I think the Rams, they need some outside cornerback help. I think there's a ton of teams with a good amount of cap space that could use a player like DJ Reed. And even, look, there's some good veteran options too. You mentioned Ward, Byron Murphy. I think Kendall Fuller's an underrated option. Had a down year in Miami, but in a similar light in a defense like that, I think Kendall Fuller could be a really good fit in a lot of spots. But I think you mentioned it. Reed's the top guy. He's going to have the most robust market. And I think there's going to be a lot of teams, at least a half dozen, I think, in on the bidding for him as, if not a number one corner, a guy who can make your secondary a lot better. Let's even take the Raiders, right? You take DJ Reed on one side, and if they decide at 6 overall, take a guy like Will Johnson, well, now you've just gotten 2 starting cornerbacks in one offseason. So I think Reed, as a very solid high-end CB2 at the least, is going to get a lot of money this offseason.
Last position, it's the safety position. And again, we got some big names here at the safety spot that I feel a lot of them could be on the move. Javon Holland from the Miami Dolphins, not a great year this past year, but man, he's had good seasons in the NFL before. Talanoa Hufanga, he's dealt with injury, but man, he's an impactful, strong safety. Cam Bynum, Justin Reed, a key part of that safety rotation for the Chiefs and their dynasty over the last couple of years. Harrison Smith, Trayvon Merrick, Justin Simmons, Jeremy Chin, Elijah Molden, Andre Sisco, Julian Blackmon. The safety spot's interesting. I think there's a lot of these guys who play the position very well and who are good football players, but even look at Justin Simmons last year, and it took forever for him to find a team. And I think that everybody was like, how is this guy available? How is he just kind of like floating around out there? And then, he signs with the Atlanta Falcons and creates a pretty good safety duo with him and Jesse Bates. And it just feels as though the NFL doesn't really prioritize the safety spot in where they draft these guys or in the contracts that they give them and how they prioritize them when they hit free agency. But to me, there's some good back end players here amongst this group that have the chance to really improve some secondaries here. Who do you want to focus on amongst this group?
Look, I'm with you first and foremost that it makes really no sense at all that it's an undervalued position, because you look at what the Eagles have done and what Vic Fangio has done throughout his career. He's always had great safeties on his defense. The Chiefs are always loaded at safety. Detroit with Kirby Joseph and Brian Branch. I mean, there's so many teams who have really good safeties, and it leads to having a really good defense. Why wouldn't you want that, right? But, among all these players here, and they're all pretty darn good players, Javon Holland, for the youth and the production over his first 4 seasons, stands out the most among anybody since he was drafted in 2021. 7th best safety in the NFL, 5th best coverage grade, tied with Jesse Bates at a 91.3. A guy who can play single high, who can play two high, who will come down and tackle. He gives you a little bit of everything, and I think the impact could be on a similar level to a Jesse Bates and what he's done in Atlanta. Actually, their profiles through the first few seasons aren't all that different. And I think when you're talking about a team that needs a high-impact safety, right, a cornerstone in their secondary, I think about, again, the Raiders. Why wouldn't you go at the top of the market? They went out and got a big-name Dolphin last year in Christian Wilkins. Why not do it again with Javon Holland and really set up your secondary with Holland as the piece to build around no matter what scheme you're running? So I think, this year, again, a down year for pretty much everyone wearing a Dolphins uniform in their secondary. But I think you have to rely on a longer track record with Holland. And, again, he's still only, going to be 25 years old this coming season?
Yeah, he's young.
It's ridiculous how young he is. And when we've seen the high end from him, it was just we're only a year removed for him grading, I think, a 90 overall. So I think you have a guy who could be an elite young talent at the position. He's going to be a high-priced guy, and there's a reason. I believe he's the 3rd-ranked free agent in the PFF Top 100 right now, and for good reason. You don't often get that combination of youth and production. We saw it a couple years ago with Jesse Bates in Atlanta, and I think it's the same thing here with Holland.
I think Talanoa Hufanga's a hell of a football player, man. I know that he's gone through some injury, but the 49ers defense is different when he is out there. And for that reason, I think it's more likely than not that he does not get out of San Francisco. I think if they find a way to bring him back. If they don't, I understand that we've brought this team's name up a lot here on this show, but I think he'd be perfect for the Commanders. I think he would be a difference-making player, especially if they're losing Bobby Wagner and they're sort of replacing a different linebacker presence next to Frankie Luvu. The way that Talanoa Hufanga can sort of roam that middle of the field as a robber and as a pseudo linebacker at times, coming down and helping in the box, I think he'd be excellent for Washington. And so that's one team that I think of for him. Somebody in the chat, Valentine in the chat, is saying Denver for Talanoa Hufanga. I think that they could certainly use him as well in the way that they play. I think Carolina, they're in an interesting spot. They got a lot of holes on their defense. And so, do you really want to pay a safety a good chunk of change? Do you feel like you're at that point in your team building process? But he would immediately be their highest impact, I think, secondary player. And that's with J.C. Horn, because J.C. Horn's been a little bit of up and down with his availability and how much that he has missed some time over the last couple of years. But at the very least, whether it's him or Horn, I think you've got 2 impact players in your secondary, and you can play a lot better in that area as well. They're losing Xavier Woods in free agency. So that's just a couple of players that I think make the most sense there. So there we go. That's the free agent class, 100-ish, more than 100 players here that we talked about on this show. Appreciate everybody watching and listening. Let us know in the comments who you want your favorite team to sign, who you think is a really good connection and somebody who can make a big difference on your team. Because free agency, man, the splash that you make in free agency, the ripple effects, they go straight into the NFL draft as well. So I'm excited to get free agency going in a couple of weeks. We got the combine coming up first, but right after that, we're going right into free agency that next week. So I'm excited for that to open up, to finalize some team needs once we get into draft season. So this is a lot of fun. It's always a fun team building time of year. For Dalton Wasserman, I'm Trevor Sikkema, saying thank you guys so much for watching and listening to the PFF NFL show. See you guys next time.